Okay, I'm not a video essayist, so normally, like, a YouTuber would splice clips together to make the point that they're making, but for the most part, you're just going to have to rely on my voice here, okay? So, Elden Ring is an incredible game. It's one of the best that I've ever played. I would consider it like a 10 out of 10. That doesn't mean it's flawless. It just means it's a 10 out of 10. Hold it in incredibly high regard. I feel like the praises of this game have been sung broadly, not only by me, but by basically everyone else. I want to criticize the game, and I want to criticize it kind of incisively. And I want to talk about it in a way that brings some other ideas that I've had about magic systems and easy mode in that game, because I have some criticisms, not of the existence of these things, but rather the way in which they interact with the game systems. It should go without saying that however you enjoy playing these games is valid. Whatever you have fun with is the best for you. However, obviously, games are designed deliberately with a certain set of mechanics in mind. Now, I am a big From Software fan. I have played Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and of course Elden Ring. I have not played Demon Souls. I will get around to it with the remaster when I get a PS5 one day. Now, I'm mainly a Dark Souls guy. I have played Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 so many times that I'm reasonably sure that with a little bit of preparation, I could soul level 1 all three of them. I have soul level 1 Dark Souls 3. I always play these games in the exact same way. I play these games with a strict melee build. I don't use magic. I don't ever use summons. And I just focus on the game's mechanics in that way. Now, Dark Souls and Elden Ring and all that stuff, you know, they have a wide range of mechanics, but I want to point out something that I feel most people can agree to. Even if the game has magic, it is a melee game. When you are fighting an enemy in Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, Elden Ring, whatever, the overwhelming bulk of their mechanics are focused around melee combat, you know. Even if you enjoy magic, this here is this is with the with the mage, which is actually the opposite of the point we're trying to demonstrate. Here is a not mage fight. If you look at the way these bosses are designed, the way their move sets overlap, the way the timings of their attacks, their feints, their dodges, their blocks, their phase transitions play together, it is very clear that these bosses are quote unquote meant to be fought in melee. The game is always trying to push you to fight these bosses in melee, with the exception of a couple of gimmick fights or fights with very specific mechanics. And I love that. I really like how it feels, you know? I really, really, really enjoy the thrill of this really difficult game that at the same time poses these massive challenges, but also lets you beat them with basically any level of gear that you have, right? Like, if you're playing Dark Souls 1, you can beat the game barehanded, basically naked, level 1. If you have enough time on your hands, you can beat the game. You know, it'll take a long time. It'll help if you put a dagger on or something. But you can beat the game. Now, that is unique to Dark Souls and other similar games. Most RPGs do not let you beat the game using its ordinary mechanics without ever leveling up, right? Like, imagine doing that in, like, a Final Fantasy game. If you could, like, mod it so that you never leveled up, one of the older Final Fantasy games, you would not be able to beat the later enemies. Mathematically, it would simply not be possible. You would get demolished. Maybe there are some, like, glitch, like, exploit ways you could get around it, but it would be incredibly difficult. Now, there are ways to do this often, but usually you have to circumvent the standard mechanics of the game. In Dark Souls, you don't. In Dark Souls, the way you beat the game, naked, barehanded, level 1, is the same way you beat the game, level 120, clad in full armor, with a gigantic broadsword. You understand? People right now in chat are trying to explain differences here, and I don't care. Can you follow my point? Like, I get it. There are a lot of video games. I know they have different rules around leveling. The point that I'm getting at is that Dark Souls, I think, does a remarkable job of giving you a leveling system, but also letting the best players not use it. I'm doing a soul level 1 playthrough of Elden Ring right now. I'm also trying not to use magic or summons. I'll see what I can do. You know, maybe I'm not good enough to beat Millennia. We'll see how it goes. Now, here's the issue, okay? The problem that I have is that for a long time, I've really disliked systems like magic in games like Dark Souls, because it felt like they, rather than accompanying or complementing the existing systems, they kind of superseded them in an awkward way. You can find playthroughs right now of Elden Ring with magic, and oftentimes bosses are defeated by the mage sitting on a horse, waving their wand, shooting magical projectiles. There are a lot of enemies and bosses, too, in Elden Ring and in the Souls games and what have you, that cannot respond to magic. They cannot respond to them, you know? Like, the bosses in Melee, sometimes they'll, like, do a big jump, land 50 feet away, and do this, like, dramatic pace around while they're, like, you're circling each other. If you're a Melee build, that is very dramatic, okay? If you're a mage build, that is, like, 8 seconds of free damage while you're waving your wand around, you know what I mean? That, like, it's, like, and the boss just takes it, too. The boss just, like, while they're getting, like, hammered with, like, meteors, you know? Again, this is not about what is or isn't valid with regards to a play style, but I want to step back a little more broadly. Difficulty, okay? Difficulty in video games is a really difficult thing to nail down, funnily enough, difficult. It's a tough thing to nail down in terms of what is or is not. People in chat are mad already of my characterization of magic. You're going to make this difficult for me. You guys know that? I'm sorry. Pure magic builds absolutely can avoid many of the mechanics that melee builds deal with. Please calm down. You're gonna be annoying, okay? Don't do this. I'm not even saying it's easier. I'm only saying that it avoids many of these mechanics. Now, difficulty is a difficult thing to pin down because we don't really know what it is. It feels like it's kind of a feeling-based thing, like if a game feels properly difficult. There are tasks which are very difficult but provide no satisfaction for completion, and tasks which are not at all difficult but do nonetheless, sometimes through synesthetic reasons, like it sounds really pleasant, like in a video game sometimes, like pressing a button with a big click and boom, can be really satisfying, like in a completionist sense, even though you just had to hit a button to do so. And oftentimes there are challenges that are very difficult that just don't feel that rewarding to complete. I think a good example of this would be, have you guys ever played Half-Life 1 with its platforming? The platforming towards the latter bit of Half-Life 1 felt like ass, because you're playing a first-person shooter, you jump a great distance, you're very, like, skiddy, and you can't see your feet, so there's, like, these tiny pillars you're trying to land on, and you don't really know where you are relative to the ground, and those areas aren't that difficult to do. Like, when I played Half-Life 1, the original, I fell down like twice. It's not that tough to do. It's also very unsatisfying difficulty, isn't it? It is a difficulty challenge. And it's not that hard. It's not as hard as many of the other things in that game, but it's not very fun. Difficulty seems to me like something it's really difficult to, like, empirically measure, but you can get a feeling for difficulty being fun and satisfying. So that, for me, is the criteria that I go about when I look at difficulty settings within a game. Because you can make a game difficult in a really fun way, like Super Meat Boy. Super Meat Boy is a very difficult game. I've never 100%ed it. I maybe could if I tried, but I don't know. I have beaten the regular levels. It's a very difficult precision platformer where you slide across these platforms and you rescue Bandage Girl and you're made of meat, and it's a great game. It's a classic platformer, one of the best ones I think ever made. And the game is really satisfying, crushingly hard. Wow, crushingly hard. Some of the later stuff there, you're beating Dark Souls in terms of difficulty by quite a bit. Very satisfying to beat. A kind of difficulty that I never enjoyed that much, regardless of how hard it actually was, is the kind of difficulty that the game expects you to overcome via save scumming. My big problem with Fallout New Vegas and games like it, where if an enemy is really difficult, pretty much a guaranteed way of overcoming any battle, as long as you have enough ammunition and equipment, is you can just quick save and quick load around every shot and attack. Instant, like, suddenly, from the perspective of that enemy, becoming like Neo from the Matrix. Like, you're just dodging every bullet, and like every single thing you're hitting them with is directly in the center of the forehead. You know what I mean? Like, instantly you turn into a perfect gamer by spending 15 minutes methodically quick saving and quick loading your way through the encounter. That's just not fun for me. Maybe other people find it satisfying. I like it when games have save and load systems that feel like they strike a good balance between making you have to nail like a decent length of content in a row before saving, but also not making it boring or trivial to get back to the point you were at before you died. This is difficult to get down perfectly. There have been times while playing Metroid Prime or Hollow Knight where I felt like the way back was kind of arduous and annoying to get through. In Elden Ring, the graces, the bonfires, are everywhere. So as long as you are attuned to the nearest grace, which isn't that tough to do, usually pretty, like, if you die, you might be like 20 or 30 seconds away at most, you know, in most places. And I like that. That's fine. I don't like feeling like I have to repeat content. Now, it comes across like I'm rambling here, but there's a reason I'm setting this up, and I'm doing all this off the dome. I don't have notes, so forgive me a little bit, okay? Yeah, Stakes of America help with that as well. When you're doing like a boss fight and they don't make you do a run back at all. It's a good system. So, with regards to all this, why am I talking about difficulty? Well, I have a big problem with Elden Ring. It's unfair in both directions. The game is unfair to you with its difficulty, and you're unfair to it with your ability to overcome that difficulty. I think that the unfairness is skewing in both directions, and I think the reason for that is because Elden Ring has, by far, the most difficult bosses in these games. Like, it's not even close. Like, Marika or whatever, trust me, Dark Souls 3, no, chat, hold on, maybe I'll get to it. Having played Dark Souls 3, the Midir, which is considered like the big endgame fight, or if you prefer, oh god, the guy with the red cloak. I'm so sorry. It's literally my favorite boss. Gale, Slave Knight Gale. Slave Knight Gale and Midir are tough fights. They are baby fights compared to some of the Great Rune holding Elden Ring fights. It's not even close. Midir is, once you get a feel for it, I think genuinely not that difficult. I would even say that Godfrey, in his proper form, is maybe harder than any boss in Dark Souls 3, and therefore 2 and 1 as well, because I think those games were on average a good bit easier. I think that if you went back and played like Dark Souls 1, you would find that Artorias and Manus, the 2 big bosses of the expansion, Artorias of the Abyss, are really slow and easy. They are. You can go back and fight them if you want. Once you get accustomed to that game's controls and timing and pacing relative to Elden Ring, those fights are not that tough. They're pretty slow in comparison, you know? You're slower, but they're like molasses compared to some of the stuff these days. Sekiro did kick the speed up significantly. So that doesn't mean these games are worse or anything. They're not. Dark Souls 1 is phenomenal. But it does mean that as time has gone on, From Software has recognized that their difficulty is something their games are renowned for, but people are getting better at their games. If they released Elden Ring, and all the bosses in Elden Ring were difficulty tuned around what you would have seen in Dark Souls 3, like relative to the speed of your roll and all that, I think people would have complained a lot. Like a lot. Because that would have been really easy. Relatively. Still be tough, but comparatively. So, as a product of this, they've tuned everything up. Bosses are harder in Elden Ring. Their attacks do more damage. You basically need 60 vigor in the later areas. They give less tel for their attacks. They have more attacks to vary between. And their attacks are a lot less fair. I'm taking some of this from the excellent video that Joseph Anderson did on Elden Ring, and I'd encourage you to watch that as well, if you haven't already. But the basic gist of it is, this problem existed a little bit before, but it's a big issue now. There are a number of attacks in Elden Ring, which are, from bosses I mean, which are incredibly and punishingly difficult to overcome without playing in a very unfair way. Now, the first example that I noticed here was Margit. This guy, who we had on screen for a bit. Now, I love this fight, don't get me wrong. I adore it, okay? But there's one specific thing this guy does that bothers me. And it's that there are a couple of attacks that he finishes, which afterwards he's vulnerable for a short period that you could, damage him in. But if you approach him, there's a chance, not a guarantee, but a chance, that he will pull out his dagger and do two quick swipes in front of him. Those knife swipes come out so quickly that if you are running into attack, it is not possible for you to react to them in time. It cannot be done without tremendous luck. It is just beyond human reaction time. I don't know if it's going to happen in the course of this fight, but these attacks really can't be dodged. Instead, you have to avoid the trigger for them altogether, meaning that after he finishes that attack, the safest thing to do if you don't want to get hit and trade blows is to simply not run in. This is how I play against him. It basically means that there are, I think, at least two big finishing moves he does, which afterwards he looks for all the world like he is vulnerable to be hit. But if you run up to him, you might just get hit. Now, don't get me wrong. Those attacks do not do that much damage. They can be blocked, 100% holy shield in his case because of the holy, because of the holy damage on his daggers, parrying, blah, blah. The point is, it is an attack pattern which punishing him. Another issue, the follow-up big fight. And there are people in chat who, again, trying to correct me and are wrong on this. They're trying to demonstrate here. They're very skilled. I know you're very skilled. There's always a way around. Let me finish the point, please. My God. Godric has an ability where every once in a while, and this I'm positive I can find an example of because he does this multiple times every fight. Godric fight. That's not how you spell that, but, Here. No cutscenes. Get to the point. There will be a point. There. This right here. That attack right there. You see that? When he spins his axe up in the air and begins to summon the wind around him, it is such that if you are next to him when he begins the tell for that attack, you are too late. The only reliable way to avoid getting hit by that attack, see, look at the way it comes out. His tell doesn't show up until the very end because he raises his arms for many reasons. See, he puts his shoulder back right there. Vaush, I've dodged that, lol. Mods, you can temporarily ban anyone who... I've dodged it too. I'm better than you are, okay? This isn't a skill check. Anyway, when he puts his elbow back, and then he raises that right there, he hits it once, twice, and then third time right there. Those wind attacks are timed so that if you're next to him, there is almost no time where you can dodge roll to avoid both the first and the second hits. They're timed perfectly, and it's in an area around him, and you get very, very little warning. Now, the safest way to play around this would be to not be near him at all unless he's explicitly in the recovery period of a previous attack, meaning that there's no chance of him beginning a new attack. Even though sometimes bosses in these games will actually clip animations and begin a new attack before they finish the recovery period from the last one. This still happens from time to time. And again, don't get me wrong, the damage that you suffer from that wind is really minimal, But I gotta say, in previous Dark Souls games, the manner in which you would no-hit all of these bosses was playing about the same way that you would play regularly. Just better. Do you understand what I mean? If you wanted to do a no-hit run of Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, a few exceptions in 2 and 3, but for the most part, you could play the game basically the same as if you're just doing a regular, normal playthrough, just much better. But in this game, I noticed at least a dozen bosses where I was thinking like, wow, if I wanted to no-hit this, I will have to play impossibly cautiously, the game expects me to hit trade. You have a large health pool, and the attacks that come out super quickly, well, they tend not to do much damage. So, hit trading it is. There's a problem here, and it's that for the longest time, the difficulty in these games has been born organically out of the dance that plays out when you and your boss are fighting it out, attacking, dodging, parrying, riposting, blocking, counterattacking, everything that you can to play it out. But let me ask you about Melania. Spoilers, I guess, because she's basically the last fight in the game. Let me ask you about Melania. Now, this has already been subject to an enormous amount of discussion online, so I'm not exactly the only one coming in on this. Melania is, in my opinion, a really fun fight. With an exception. See, for the most part, while you're fighting her, she follows the rules. Her attacks have a fair follow-through. Even the fastest one, where she swipes her blade a couple times in front of her, if you dodge diagonally in front, you can almost always avoid that damage. If you're good, you'll always avoid it. She has pauses between her attacks, fair tells. Look, she's not even that fast. A lot of health, 2 phases, sure, but a fair fight. It's fun and fair to respond. She's a... Wait, what is that? That's the waterfowl dance. This attack pattern has been subject to a tremendous amount of discussion online, and I don't want to talk about it too much. This move will, if you are in full heavy plate armor at 60 vigor, one-shot you a third of the way through the animation. This does not cut low on damage. It will kill you very quickly. This is not some light, light hit. Now, see, she follows you for a while here, and even the very good player we're watching takes a couple of hits. Not a big deal, right? Like, she jumps up in the air. We see this again. She jumps up in the air. This is your tell. Except you can't really get far enough away. There is a strategy to avoid all damage here. If you dodge through her in just the right way and run far back enough, like you can manage to. It's possible. I've done it a couple of times. I've beaten her with my character. Though eventually, honest to God, I got so bored of this attack and the seeming randomness and unfairness of its design that for the first time in any FromSoft game, I equipped a Great Shield. When playing against this, you have to understand that a slight misroll, 1 out of 8 to 10, can instantly lead to your death. Now, there are ways of overcoming that. You can skill your way through that. But I don't think skilling your way through that is... How do I put this? I don't think it's in line with the fairness of the design that the game had established beforehand. It could be the case, after all, that a boss could have in its middle section a 30-minute platforming bit that you have to overcome before killing it. That would be a difficulty spike you'd have to overcome, but I wouldn't like it. And I don't like this attack either, but it gets worse. Yeah, exactly. It's possible, but I don't feel it's really that reasonable. Now this is just the first phase. If you get to the second phase, and booba alert, guys, quite a boss, I must say, design-wise. A visual spectacle, a feast for the eyes. If only they had antibiotics in the lands between. Yeah, she has turbo syphilis. Anyway, cool boss, rot goddess. Right. Anyway, here's the issue. In her second phase, remember how in the first phase, her tell that she was going to do that attack was, oh my god, this guy is using a mimic tier. He's going to kill her before she even does the second waterfowl dance. You remember how in the first phase, she would jump up in the air and that was the tell that she was going to use the waterfowl dance? In the second phase, she has 3 attacks that are preceded by her jumping up in the air. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal. It's not on its own. But what it means is, if you're up next to her because you're melee fighting her, and you're locked onto her, your camera now looks at a 180 degree up, and all you see are her feet. From that position, it is very, very difficult to tell whether she is about to do the waterfowl dance, the attack that can insta-kill you if you don't run away and respond perfectly, or one of the other two possible attacks. The point that I'm getting at is this. These are just a few of, if I were to look for them, dozens of examples of elements of these boss designs where I don't feel the way they've escalated the difficulty if you're trying to not get hit is reasonable. It's difficult, but it's cheap. And I think that this game is celebrated mostly because the difficulty has always felt fair, you know? Like, if you want to play difficult video games, it's not hard to find them, but really good, difficult games feel great to play because they're fair and it feels earned. And there goes my cat. Hold on. Nope. Silenced. Now here's the issue, okay? I understand I've been rambling about this for a while, but I'm now going to bring it home to my point, okay? I feel like in an effort to increase the difficulty of their games, which they kind of have to do to continue upping the ante with the way these games are famed for their skill-based, gameplay, it's kind of necessary they continue to provide a challenge to seasoned players, which I am. If they need to keep upping the ante, they need to find ways to up the ante. And it seems like they are doing so in a way that feels dishonest to the spirit of the series. Maybe that comes across as a little bit hyperbolic, but I want to substantiate it, okay? These games are good because they're hard but fair. That's the line from Souls fans, right? Difficult but fair, right? Not difficult but doable. We know these fights are doable. Difficult but fair. This isn't even a difficulty scaling thing. It's a way the difficulty is presented. Again, imagine you had a fight with Lenia, right? And imagine that instead of a waterfowl dance, which is a devastating move, instead there was a section where you had to follow her down a cliff drop and you have to sort of narrowly balance on these ledges to get down, and there's basically it's pretty easy to slip and fall and just die of fall damage, That would not be that difficult to learn how to do. But would you feel satisfied overcoming that challenge? To me, that death would feel really unearned. I'm having this really great duel, and then oh, now I have what? And then I die from a fall, and it just feels incongruous. It feels annoying. Okay, great, you killed me with the fall damage. It takes away from the experience. That's how I feel with the waterfowl dance, because it's not an ability that I can really engage with. You know what I mean? When she does the waterfowl dance, you run away, and you have to essentially either get lucky with your rolls or memorize a very specific pattern of rolling through her at every timing. And that's just not a level of reactive difficulty that is present in a lot of the other fights in this game. Most of the fights in these games you can actually beat on your first try because the game does a really good job of conveying the weight and momentum of the attacks that you're about to experience. If you're fighting a big dragon, you know when it's about to breathe fire, light starts to come from its open mouth. You know when it's about to sweep its tail, it shuffles on its back legs. You know when it's about to kick you because it raises that leg. There's an intuitive logic to these attacks that feels satisfying because you don't need to just memorize the fight. That's not fun. Instead of memorizing the fight, you can intuit the fight. You feel like you're there in the fight, reacting as it happens, That's a really good feeling. That feels incredible to do. Yeah, Monster Hunter is a really good series for that. And most of Millennia's fight is about that. Exactly. Process over memory. Don't get perfect at memorizing the attacks of one boss. Get perfect at knowing how to respond to the tells the boss gives you. I love that feeling in these games. That's what sells these games to me. The feeling that I can go back and play Dark Souls 1 and fight Artorias and not remember the attacks that Artorias has, but still just flow into the fight because all of his moves make sense. You know when he's about to swing the sword around. You know when he's about to do that flippy attack. You can feel it. You can see it in the motions of his body. But it's not always like that, and it's gotten less like that. And it's difficult to wrap I think it's difficult to wrap your mind around how difficult of a challenge this must feel from Software's perspective, because they face this overwhelming task of making a game somehow accessible to people, but also like increasingly difficult to veterans. To make fights, despite there being like dozens in these games, like, you know, feel fresh and innovative, not too much of a repetition of earlier fights. Like, how do you manage that? I think what they did was they made these fights a little bit less fair than they should have been. And then I think they made the player a lot less fair than they should be. In Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, magic existed. And magic has always been considered a relatively easy mode strategy. Varying depending on the boss. There are some for which it's even, and some for which I'd argue melee builds are actually quite a bit easier to manage than magic, but it's generally had that stigma attached to it. Now, again, if you enjoy magic, that's phenomenal, and I would never take that away from you. However, the problem that I've always had with magic is that it has the potential to ignore the mechanics which already exist in the game. No matter what people in my chat may say, you know, they can be as wrong as they like, but the existence of ranged attacks that deal high damage, it does trivialize elements of combat with bosses which are designed to be fought from like 5 feet away, dodge rolling and blocking and parrying and jumping over and, you know, responding and counter-respond and counter-respond. And sometimes, you know, you can be on the other side of the room with magic, and by the time they even get to you, half their health is gone. Not all bosses. Some bosses have very quick ranged attacks, punishes. They can get to you very quickly, and in those cases, even a magic build has to do a melee fight. But there are a lot of bosses that just do not know how to respond. And also, that's not going to change. You know why? Because it's enough work as it is to make all these bosses fun and interesting in melee. Imagine adding an additional range of movesets on top that make them engaging from range. That is a lot of work. That is a lot of work. I don't ask From Software to do that. I mean, you'd have to add like 2, 3, 4 at minimum attacks to these bosses to make them engaging to respond to from a distance as well. For some of them are already pretty okay, I think. That's just not a reasonable ask. But magic has always been there. Same with faith builds, you know, incantations and sorceries and what have you. And, you know, now we have even more stuff. We have Ash summons, sorry, where you can just summon a dude. That's what happens in this fight here at the end. See, we have Malenia enter her second phase, Goddess of Rot. Look at her health right down there, down here. Now, this is the second phase of Malenia, is without question the most difficult thing in Elden Ring. I hope nobody disagrees with that. I think it is. It's the hardest thing in Elden Ring. How does this Moog is much harder? Only margin? Oh, I don't think so. But again, whatever. It's definitely up there. Anyway, let's see how this intrepid warrior deals with this you know, new threat. Well, they summon the Mimic Tier, for one, over here on the left-hand side. And look at the health of Malenia in the second phase here in the last minute of the video. All right. One combo, half of her health bar. Right there. Now, admittedly, this is dual katanas. This is maybe pre-nerf Mimic Tier. What time did this come out? Pre-nerf Mimic Tier. So this is the most hyperbolic example. You know, not all invocations of ashes are going to look like this. However, even today, ashes are very good. The 4 Great Shield guys that you can get from Nukron, the Lost City, you can summon them, and they will just bully any boss. I mean, they like these 4 guys with great shields. They basically can't be knocked down. They don't take physical damage, and they will just absolutely just annihilate a boss. They will keep them quiet, and then you can run up and hit them all you want. The problem that I've always had with difficulty scaling in these games, and that's exactly what these things are. Magic, ashes, this is difficulty scaling. The most difficult normal way to play is a pure melee build. Adding in magic for a relatively low stat investment will give you additional abilities that oftentimes can significantly increase your strength, not just in terms of range damage, but support spells. Items are also helpful in terms of like expendable, like craftable items that can give you resistances relative to the fight, can add bleed to your weapons, stuff like that. These are all ways of tuning the difficulty down. And I think that's great. These games should be accessible to everyone. Elden Ring is a really great game. I want everyone to be able to enjoy it. However, I have to bring us back to an earlier example. I don't agree with methods of making these fights easier, which allow you to circumvent or invalidate elements of the content. Imagine if there was an easy mode in Super Meat Boy. There's not, but imagine if there was, okay? Now, imagine if the easy mode, what it did was it gave you the ability to hover for a few seconds. Now, in some areas, this wouldn't be helpful at all. It would not help you in a fight even slightly. In other levels, it would completely trivialize the experience. It wouldn't even be like a level. Some of these levels can be beaten in 1, 2, 3 seconds. The ability to hover through some of them would literally just invalidate the entire level. And for some levels, it would do very little. For some, it would help a little bit. You know, there's a lot of variance. And isn't that kind of how Magic and Tears or Ashes feel? Like, there are some fights where a proper Magic build can literally just delete the boss without them ever being able to hit you because their only punishes are in melee and they can't get to you quickly and they don't have ranged attacks. Ashes as well have the ability sometimes to completely invalidate or trivialize a fight. And in other fights, they're not that effective or that useful. That to me is a weird kind of difficulty scaling that there are people in YouTube chat pointing out there is a character in Super Meat Boy that can hover. I meant like in addition to Super Meat Boy's moveset, just a flat easy hover. I just want you to imagine the ability to overcome content in an asymmetrical way. In my mind, if you were to make an easy mode for Super Meat Boy, you know what I would do? Have a checkpoint that you can choose at any part in the level. These levels, they last usually like 20 seconds, you know. They're not very long. They don't take long to complete. Maybe you could hit a button on your controller and it would place a flag checkpoint anywhere and you could just restart from there. It would essentially have the potential to like let you retry a particularly difficult jump over and over with like a half-second repeat time. Like look at these precision jumps, you know. I've done this level. It's tough, trust me. Like that right there. Imagine if you could just put a flag down like before jumping off this edge right here. That would be an interesting way to make the game easier. You wouldn't invalidate any content. All of the content would have to be overcome the same way as in a regular playthrough. It would just lessen the the burden of having to do it all sequentially. Now, again, I understand this all feels very disjointed and disconnected, okay? And I apologize for that. I really didn't write a script down, but I really want to get my feelings out in this. I really, really like what magic and incantations and miracles and ashes add to the game. The issue I have is that it feels like we have two contradictory systems merging together, all right? One of them is player choice, and the other one is player difficulty setting. And those two things, I think, serve very different purposes, okay? I want to feel like I can experience all the content in a game like Elden Ring without, like, feeling like I'm cheating, basically, on some bosses, you know? I want to experience like the fun of like dogpiling some of these enemies with the ashes that I level up without having like late game bosses literally not interact with me because they're being tanked by my summons the entire fight. That's another way in which ashes allow you to overcome content, by the way. Bosses in Elden Ring, or in fact any of these games, are meant to fight one person. That's what they're meant to fight. If you add more people, it can still be a fun experience, but it's very obvious for a lot of these bosses that they're not meant to like switch targets and they don't often know what to do. So like a boss can fixate on one guy and you can just be behind them and hit them like 70 times and they just, you know, die. Not saying it's not valid, not saying it's not fun. I've done it. It's fun. In Dark Souls 3, I played that game regularly. I was the summon person. Like they'd summon me to help them with the boss. I loved doing that. I did it for months. There's a lot of variance in how it plays out. And That's the thing. It's that variance, right? Will magic completely, like, invalidate this boss? Will these ashes completely invalidate this boss? Or will it be like a challenging fight where I get to engage with its mechanics? I don't know. All I know is that if you go into all these boss fights as a melee-only build, you're pretty much always going to get a consistent experience. Maybe its patterns will be harder or less difficult in one run to another, but if you go into, like, Melania or, Mohg, or the big dragon fights at the end, or Godfrey, or Horalu, or whatever else, in a pure melee build, you're going to have a relatively consistent experience, and rarely are you going to beat a boss because they gave you an easy break. Have you ever felt like an experience like that was trivialized by being given an easy break? I felt it before, even in pure melee fights. I remember it the first time I fought Calamite in Dark Souls 1, where for some reason he got, like, locked into this one very slow attack animation that he did. And it's one of these endgame bosses, and I just sat next to one of his feet and I just hit him over and over again, and he never had a chance at hitting me, not with the attack he was spamming. And he just died, and I felt like I'd been cheated of a good fight. And I had been. In future playthroughs, the fight was a lot more interesting. That's not always something that can be helped, the variance in boss experience. But I do know that it can be exacerbated significantly with summons and with magic. Which brings me to another problem that I have with the bosses in Elden Ring. See, I'm talking right now about things that feel a bit unfair from the player's end. Not ways of making you stronger or the game easier per se, but methods of doing that that invalidate some of the content, But to move it back to the other end, Elden Ring has too many gank fights, People have complained about this, and I have to say that for the most part, I agree. This is in the same vein as I don't like how Melania and Margit and Godric's attack patterns, if you don't want to get hit, require you to play unnecessarily cautiously and with a ridiculous degree of fastidiousness. In the same vein, I think that fights should be difficult but fun. And a lot of these gank fights where they fight, they put you up against two enemies at the same time, a lot of them are not fun. A lot of them are running around in circles waiting for one of them to finish an attack animation that leaves it vulnerable, while through just pure fortune, the other enemy or enemies in the fight are, like, far enough back that you can run in and punish them with a couple of hits before continuing the run. Repeat ad infinitum. That is not fun. I'm sorry, that is just not a fun way of playing the game. One of my least favorite invocations of this is Niall. What's the name of the one in Castle Sol? He spawns two of these really agile Niall. Here, hold on. I dislike this fight quite a bit. The one in Castle, is it Neil? The one here. This is the same channel. The one that's on top of the Castle Sol. So this is this guy, he summons two knights to begin with. And oh, we brought the gank squad. I can't blame him. Unfairness met with unfairness. I don't think the beginning of this fight is fair. So he's going to use these. And look what happens. I haven't seen this video. I'm saying look what happens without knowing what happens. These two knights right here, the one he's fighting right now, these are very strong enemies. Their attacks are massive, far-reaching. They're very fast. As you can see, this experienced player is still getting hit by them. They do very high damage. He's only fighting one of them. His summons are taking care of the boss and the other one. Now, I ask you, is this fight meant to be played with summons? If that's the case, that feels a bit... Maybe it's good to summon them, don't get me wrong, but I feel like all the content in this game should be fun and approachable to a pure melee build, because that's the heart of the mechanics of this game. Look at that. Now he has only 3 of the demi-humans left. They're already mostly dead. Without those demi-humans, you know what he would have had to do? The same thing that I did. Run in circles around the arena over and over again, waiting for one of the knights to do an attack that gets them close enough to you, dodge it, and then attack him once or twice, then continue the cycle. Until eventually, after maybe 2 minutes, Commander Niall is alone, and then you have a proper, real boss fight that I actually find fun and satisfying. But you make it more difficult like this, don't you? Gank fights, to me, are just not fun. For me, a really good gank fight is one where the bosses are designed in such a way that you're only ever fighting one in melee and the other one like interweaves attacks. The best two, Joseph Anderson pointed this out, the best two gank fights ever in these games, I mean ever, by far, the Demon Princes and oh god, the Scythe Lady from the Dark Souls 3 Ashes of Ariandel. Help me out. Frida, Lady Frida. Here, Demon Princes DS3 fight. Let me show you what I mean, just so you know what this can really feel like. This is in the final expansion of Dark Souls 3, and it is my favorite gank boss fight. Basically, you jump down, you somehow don't take damage. And the way this fight works is that there are two demons who power up, and they cycle between phases that both of them go through. They both share the exact same moveset, but they alternate, essentially. One of them has a ranged phase, and the other will have a melee. The one he's fighting right now is clearly in its melee phase, hence the meleeing. But did you see that? That little trail on the ground? Look at that purple dust, and then, boom. That's a warning indicator for the ranged attack. Why isn't that happening more in Elden Ring? Why? It is not fair or fun to expect a player to, in a fight which requires you to roll around and dodge and everything, to keep an eye on both enemies at the same time and just effortlessly know when to respond. Look, see, right now they're both doing their melee phase, but now that one just entered its ranged phase. The one that is currently being targeted is now in its ranged phase. As such, it'll be much weaker in melee. I think it just got staggered. Yep. Phenomenal fight. The best gank fights are ones where there's an asymmetry between the characters that you're fighting, which allows you to focus on one thing at a time while still dealing with the overlapping mechanics. The Godskin duo fight, while difficult and entertaining in some of its own ways, is not that. A lot of the Godskin duo fight is just trying to position them behind the pillars to like bait one of them into walking further along so that you can hit it. And it's a very long fight and it's very difficult. And they respawn, and oh my god, it's like so 4v1 technically, just two of them show up at a time. That's quite a fight, very difficult. That's a kind of unfairness that I can't really get behind either. Because again, in a gang fight, if you want to go through it melee only and hitless, you can. Just be prepared to roll around the arena for a couple of minutes while slowly dealing chip damage to the enemy that keeps attacking closest to you every time, stuff like that. Now, Big Ol' brings me to my next point. I think you're correct that most mechanics in ER are geared towards melee, but maybe fights like Nail are meant to push you towards engaging with a diversity of mechanics. And I agree. But there is an issue. First of all, if you're meant to switch up your tactics in that way often, you need a larval tier to respec your character fully. If you want to switch from like pure melee to like magic, and it's not the easiest thing to do. You can switch weapons, of course. You can equip new weapon arts, and you can get ashes. That's something. The second thing is, Commander Nile doesn't encourage diversity of tactics. It encourages you to give up and just accept the cheap ability the game gives you. Like, if you fight Commander Nile 10 times, die every time, you're like, okay, I'll try the ashes out. Use the ashes, beat the fight way easier, and then it's like, oh, I could have done this for every boss in the game. To me, at least, that is distinctly unsatisfying. It doesn't feel like you're switching up your tactics. It just feels like you're hitting the overpowered ability button that just allows you to, again, not even make bosses easier, but sometimes completely invalidate their content. If it were up to me, and it's not, easy mode in Dark Souls would be an actual thing that you could do in the lore of the game. It could be a little bit like Pathologic 2. Like kind of the opposite of the Covenant of Champions in Dark Souls 2. Imagine if there was an NPC out in the world early on who, they want to enter a bargain with you, and you'll enter like the pact with a greater power outside the lands between, one of the outer gods. And what it does is it buffs your damage, buffs your health, nerfs enemy damage, nerfs enemy health. Not by a ton, but just like that. And that's easy mode. And maybe you get like not a bad ending, but like a specific ending at the end of the game. To be fair, like all Dark Souls endings are bad endings, because it's always like, congratulations, you facilitated the apocalypse in some unique way. It's like, okay, I don't think that would feel too punishing for people on the like the easy mode route. There could even be cool narrative ways of getting out of it, right? Like maybe a player feels they've gotten good enough that they don't need the handicap, so they could like kill the NPC that's like the envoy of that greater power, and then like they drop some item they have to chuck into a volcano, and then all all the stats vroom, like go back to normal. To me, I think that would be a fair way of handling easy mode. I just don't like the idea of selecting it out of a menu because I feel like that kind of clashes with Dark Souls's minimalist sort of UI aesthetic in a way. Like the game doesn't have a lot of like menu stuff outside of the in-game crafting and weapon management, if that makes any sense. There's not much meta menu engagement in these games, which I like. And if we could see something to be done with summons and with magic and what have you, I have to ask, and I wonder if you guys would think this dumb, but I want when I add magic to my build, I don't want to feel like I'm making myself stronger. I want to feel like I'm changing the way I play, but not like I'm giving myself a handicap. The way I always thought would be coolest would be that magic or miracles or whatever else would be something that basically every player would be expected to do and to use, which to an extent is already true, but follow through with me here. And your focus points, your mana, the blue bar, it would replenish through melee attacks. It would be an ever-changing flow like your stamina bar would be, so that everyone has like a cool magic ability or a big fire nova or some like personal heal or like a barrier or a buff or something like that, a meteor they could summon. But you got to engage in some melee. You attack, you build up like the thing, and then it's there and you can use that ability. And so like a red mage, a little bit. I like that because again, the bosses are designed for melee combat. I don't think there's any getting around that. They can accommodate ranged combat, but they're designed for melee combat. And to me, the magic and the what have you, it would feel a lot better if it was like a complementary thing that fit in with the mechanics of the game that already exist. It would make me feel like I'm not cheating or making it easier. It would make me feel like when I'm exploring different builds, I'm not choosing the easy one or the bad one. I'm choosing like different varieties, One thing that I think might be cool is, drop the leveling system altogether, right? Maybe as you beat bosses in the main world, you open up something kind of like talisman slots, except instead it's a kind of gem system. And you use the runes that you gather when you kill enemies, standard stuff, to combine into runes, and you slot them in for like a stat increase in a block. Here's 10 to vigor. Here's plus 10 to strength, here's plus 10 to dexterity, here's plus 5 to dex and plus 5 to strength, here's this to that. You can get better and better. And the way it would be balanced is that, there would be an end point. I mean, you would only have so many slots to fill these out. The gems could only get so strong. But the reason why I like this in concept is because I feel like there are ways you could work through a system like that, which would allow you to meaningfully change your build without like making things easier. Instead of ashes being like a do you or don't you thing, like a, win or don't. What if it was just like a very temporary summon that you could call in, kind of like in Marvel versus Capcom a little bit, where it's like 5 to 10 seconds of assistance from like some NPCs. I think that could be really fun personally. I don't know, or maybe a different degree of variety. I guess the issue is that in every way I want to explore the mechanics of the game, I don't want it to factor into how easy or how difficult the game is in a way which detracts from the existing mechanics. It would be, if it just made it easier to add magic onto a build, that would be fine. But often it makes it easier in a way that allows you to get around the coolest parts of these fights. I've done magic builds, and I've done melee builds, and I gotta tell you folks, and I'm really sorry, but you're fooling yourself if you don't think this is true. Do you really think that playing with a magic build is going to get you the same consistent, intense fights that you get in a melee build? On average, no. I'm sorry, if you disagree with that, then I mean, it's a subjective thing, but I definitely think that these fights are coded for melee. And if you want a more relaxing experience, that is totally fine. But again, you have that conflation again. You have two separate things, making it easier and allowing you to ignore mechanics. And I don't like that those two things overlap. I don't like that there are fights that basically push you into the easy mode, but they don't do it in a way that makes the easy mode more accommodating of the fight design. They do it in a way that basically means you get to invalidate the fight design. I don't know how many other ways I can say that, but I believe it really strongly. I want really difficult fights. Listen, I beat Melania pretty quickly and pretty easily once I just like sat down and actually focused on it. It wasn't really that difficult. Then I went ahead and beat her again on New Game Plus without a Great Shield. It wasn't that tough, you know. I want difficult bosses. But I want these difficult bosses to be fun and rewarding and engaging, and we're running up against problems here. Because gank fights, if they're not designed really well, aren't fun. They're tedious. And additionally, enemies that can do like 30 hit combos with no room for a counterattack, that's boring. You know, you may have to perfectly time 18 dodges to not get hit. That's great. It's kind of boring to not get to attack for a long time. You can give the bosses really high health bars, but again, that kind of gets tedious. I mean, not all these fights should be fights of endurance, and you can give them really high damage, but that doesn't really make the fight that much more fun. It just kind of tunes the numbers. From Software is in a really difficult position. I feel like the closest they got to overcoming this was in Sekiro. As Joseph Anderson points out, in Sekiro, there's a perfect synthesis of offensive and defensive capabilities where you attack relentlessly because whenever they attack, you're basically expected to jump or Mikiri counter or parry. And in doing all of those things, you get to keep the pressure on. There aren't any down periods in Sekiro. The fight continues and the tension builds as your stamina, your poise break gets higher and their poise break gets higher. And you know that eventually one slip up from you or them is going to mean they lose a health chunk or you fucking die. And it gets higher and higher. And eventually you overcome it. You get that last hit in them and you stab them through the heart and you fucking kill them. And it's so good. It feels so good. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Sekiro is also the From Software game that had one weapon, one armor set, and no traditional leveling system. Every mechanic within Sekiro was specifically and perfectly designed to be a fair complement to the mechanics presented in that game. There isn't some extra mechanic you can do that allows you to sit on the other side of the arena, just sort of waving your wand and annihilating them from a distance. There's not a mechanic that allows you to call in the gank squad to keep them busy for 40 seconds while you toss shuriken. It's a really good game. But Sekiro does not have the mechanics of Dark Souls or Elden Ring. It doesn't play the same way. Not exactly, at least. Thank you, Emily. It's important. It's been fun, yeah. And that makes me worried. It makes me worried about the same thing that Joseph Anderson. Again, I want to let you guys know, like, please watch this video. Is this the future of the From Software game? Bosses with higher health pools, higher damage, less fair attack patterns, less fun attack patterns to engage with if you don't ever want to get hit. But also the player gets increasingly like bullshit mechanics circumventing stuff to supplement it. I really, really hope not, because there is the potential for incredible good in these games, you know? I just wonder how they're going to pull it off. Some level of abstraction, maybe? Personally, I think one thing that would go a really, really, really long way is to lean into abstraction when it comes to area of effect and ranged attack tells, you know? There are some things that you can only really get away with if you have these tells or if you have environments built around them. So for example, imagine you're fighting an enemy and you're both, you know, it's like a duel between two knights, you're a knight, they're a knight, right? But you're doing it on a big stone plinth and there are dart traps all around in a sort of grid format. And every once in a while, the boss will do an attack on the ground, and they'll all shoot forward. And basically, it'll be like a tic-tac-toe like line, like a bunch of crosses, and you have to stand in the squares between the travel path of the arrows. You know, does that make sense? That'd be pretty difficult to do without some kind of indicator or tell. It's also a little bit abstract, don't you think? It always feels like bosses in From Software games don't really have environments. To give you an example of what I mean, Oftentimes in Elden Ring, and by oftentimes I mean like all the time, you'll find bosses in different areas where the environments don't feel even remotely like the area you first found them in. The big tree spirit things, you find them a dozen times in tightly confined corridors, in rivers, in giant open areas next to buildings. You can fight those things anywhere. The big tree, air tree avatar guardian things, you can fight those things anywhere. Where are the proper arenas is what I'm really asking. Now, don't get me wrong, the arena design from an aesthetic perspective and from software games is top tier. But in a mechanical sense, don't you guys think it's a little bit odd that in a game with this much mechanical complexity, the arenas in which you fight these bosses are usually just large spaces you fight them in? I'm imagining enemies that have attacks where you have to like roll behind rocks to avoid getting hit, or like stones that are on the tops of like imps that like collapse and the stones are in a new place and you have to use that to avoid like those big shifting flame towers that spin or whatever. Like I feel like you could like jump that and then get like give me an hour and a Word document, and I feel like I could come up with a solid like 24 really cool boss designs. A lot of MMO raid bosses are like that. That's true, and it's probably not a coincidence that I played WoW at a pretty high level for a long time. But I do think that's kind of pointed, isn't it? In an MMO fight with a proper raid boss, everything about the environment in which you fight them is like mathematically tuned to support the mechanics that they have. Does that make any sense? Like in World of Warcraft, most modern raid bosses, if you fight against them, the environment there has some very specific mechanics that pertain to their abilities as a boss. Like there will be platforms that'll move, things that'll crumble or fall apart, towers that'll glow and shoot lasers in a particular pattern depending on the series of rune inscriptions they slam into the ground. Like, and that's engaging. I can tell you from personal experience, a lot of these fights would be way, way, way worse if every WoW raid fight was conducted in like the same final destination tier, like a big empty arena. Isn't that what From Software games do, kind of? I'm thinking right now of all of the Elden Ring fights, and I genuinely think that pretty much all of them have environments that are just kind of prettily crafted. The closest thing that I can really think of to like a distinct environment, something that has unique mechanics built around the boss, is Radahn, General Radahn. And that's only really because the gigantic field kind of accompanies the lore of the fight, and also because you can summon dudes to help you, and you need the big area for his fucking meteor attack. Godskin Noble, that is something they often do. They did the same thing with Ornstein and Smo, didn't they? What does From Software do to mediate the worst gank fights? Pillars. Use pillars to take advantage of the boss's movement AI to get one of them to get closer to you than the other. Yeah, a common pattern, to be sure. I think much more could be done. With how complex the bosses are, wouldn't a complex arena be an information overload? I'm going to be honest with you, my friend Mortaray. I want that. I want these bosses to be brutal. I want to be stuck on these bosses for a long time and have no recourse apart from getting better. That's what I want. I don't want a boss to have some very difficult attack pattern where I think, oh, if I just ran away and spammed magic here, then I'd be able to do half their damage or half their health and damage before they recovered and came back to attacking me. I don't want to think, oh, if I use summon ashes, then I can overcome this. I want to think, man, this fight right here requires nothing of me but my skill, and I am willing to provide it. And I still want that build diversity, but I want the build diversity to accompany the mechanics. The idea of magic or faith, where the only way to get the energy to use your abilities is through melee attacks, sounds so cool to me that it legitimately makes me want to abandon the work that I do and use the money that I've gotten from streaming specifically to make an isometric perspective 3D indie game built around the idea of a knight that has magical abilities that you empower through your attacks or whatever. Hollow Knight did this, and Hollow Knight is amazing. So, I think everyone can agree that the health/magic system of Hollow Knight was really good. Like everyone liked it. Like it's like really really good. Very fond of that. I want to see something like that, especially because think of all the cool stuff that you could do if magic was meant to be woven into melee combat rather than something separate. So rather than you stepping back, switching to the staff, whoosh, 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 you know, like that. Like imagine if you're like some big knight with like a gigantic greatsword, and you're like swinging it around fighting, and then your focus meter gets high enough, and then you hit da button. And then your left hand just glows red, and you slam it into the ground, and just lava waves every direction. And it's just seamless because it's meant to be integrated with the melee combat rather than being a separate system. I feel like that could be just phenomenal, personally. Wait, somebody asked. Mia Hawk says, "What is the difference between getting good and having to memorize the attack patterns through repetition, which you said you don't want?" The critical difference here is readability, okay? In a very well animated boss, you will be able to get a feeling for what they're about to do based on their movements. If you want an example of what it looks like when an incompetent studio is trying this, go look at Legends of the Fallen, which was like a Dark Souls wannabe back in like 2015 or something. You know, you'll be like standing up against a big knight. Lord of the Fallen, sorry, whatever I said, it's Lord of the Fallen. You'll be standing up against like a big knight, like standing there, you know, he'll be there, and then he'll just be holding a sword like this. Like it'll just happen. The attack will simply just happen. You just have to know the attack's going to happen. Like there's no guarantee that this fight is fair. It just happens. Like you just tank it, like whatever, just do your damage. The thing that I always liked about the From Software games, and I guess I'll just finish on this because I think he's still my favorite fight in all of these games is Slave Knight Gale. The thing that I like really appreciate is like pay attention to his animations, okay? You know what is going on with him. You know what's going on with his behavior. God, he's cool. I love him. Every attack that he does, and I mean every attack that he does here, is prompted by physical motions. Look at that. I love it, you know? And additionally, you know, you can even tell that he's going to delay the attack almost instantly here. You know, I'm going to slow it down. As you get closer, he pulls back. As the snap of his elbow pulls back, within about 10 frames or so, he stops moving, and that's your tell he's going to hold the thrust rather than instantly go into it. Otherwise, he would have continued forward with his shoulder. He holds it, and then he puts one leg up. See that? Look at that. It's actually genius how well they telegraph it. See? He turns, he puts a leg up, and you know from the motion here, you can tell how far he is into the actual snap of the attack. Because every attack, of course, is going to have its snap when the actual damage begins. And then, bam! Just like that. It is remarkable how well... Look at this! Even that right there. Again, perfectly demonstrated right there. See? The next attack begins. He carries his sword up. He has one hand sort of non-committally thrown forward. Look at his feet. He steps and he leans in, and the damage hasn't begun yet. You have time to roll out of this. You can see from the way he carries his arms, his legs, it does such a phenomenal job of directing the momentum of the attack. And you can just see that in the entire fight. It's not like this perfectly for all the fights, but I think this is something to strive towards here, you know? I feel like when I'm watching this fight take place, I can feel myself playing it. There's so much kinesthetic momentum to the attacks that he's using that I feel like I'm subconsciously like hitting the roll button in time to when I would need to. Like I can feel it just delivers on that so well. Even his ranged attack right there, he doesn't do it immediately. He pulls out his crossbow. There's an audible noise, which you'd hear if I didn't have it muted, and he only fires in front of him before turning to you. See? He's fair. He always gives you time. You know, I lied when I said that was the last one. I want to finish on this. Midir, which a boss I'm very fond of. And I'm going to turn audio back on too. Because Madeira is an example of what From Software can do going forward. They fucked this up with a lot of the dragon fights in Elden Ring. The ancient dragons, the ones that have the red lightning, those fights are kind of bullshit. I'm sorry, guys. Those fights against the ancient dragons in Elden Ring are literally just like hug their leg, do damage, like roll anytime it looks like they're doing something up above. Like that's how you fight them. Like if you want to like memorize all the patterns, you can, but that's how you fight them. This is a dragon fight. God. God, the score. This fight right here, okay? If how that gets survived, this guy's like tanky as hell, okay? This fight right here is not fun if you attack his legs. You do like no damage, okay? And he's just going to keep spinning around and breathing fire at his feet. It's just not fun. But his head, which is the only lock-on point for his entire body, thus telling you that's what you should focus on, takes double damage. And as a product of that, you now have a unique type of fight, something underutilized in Elden Ring. A fight in which you have a massive bestial enemy with very high damage and high health who you can't just run under and do the standard beast fight thing, where you just like attack their legs when they're busy with something else. You have to engage with his head or spend 80 hours here. And it is such a good fight. It feels so good. And this guy's not hitting his head, he's hitting his neck. Well, hopefully he corrects that at some point. And his head stays close to the ground. You guys remember the standard dragon fights in Elden Ring? The ones you see like 50 times, where they deal, or they take double damage from the head? Most enemies in Elden Ring do, most big enemies. Their heads are only next to the ground, like very infrequently, and it's basically just for those pauses after an attack. The thing that I love about Midir is his head stays close to the ground all the time when he's doing melee attacks. Look, he constantly keeps his head down low to the ground. If you're very good, and I would like to think that I was at this fight, because I beat it Soul Level 1 first try, if you can believe it. I just knew the fight that well. You can weave through his attacks and hit him during his swipe patterns. This isn't boring. This doesn't require some like 5-hour window you have to dodge before returning fire or whatever. It's a constant battle, and it sounds so good. How is that a fight? It's a good fight. Anyway, those are my thoughts. They got rambly, but I didn't have a script, and I think I delivered on my opinions. In summary, I feel like Elden Ring boss design is pushing the difficulty in a direction which is less fun and less consistent and less fair. I feel like some of the difficulty that you see in Elden Ring is not up to the standard of fairness and quality that's been present throughout the series for the most part. And I think to compensate for that, rather than making the player characters just stronger, they're making the player characters stronger in a way which allows them to circumvent mechanics, which I think is just kind of destructive to the overall feel and pacing. I think it's okay to have a wide build variety, but I think you should do it in a way that doesn't have some types of builds be way easier than others. Like, what are you supposed to do if the most fun way to play for you also happens to be the easiest way to play, but you enjoy difficulty? That kind of sucks. It basically means that if you want to get the difficult, like, melee-only experience, you have to do something you find less fun. And there's also the opposite problem as well, where some people find the most fun thing also the most difficult to do, which is me, because I like melee only. I like the difficulty, don't get me wrong, but some of these fights just feel like they were designed using Ash Tears or Magic or whatever. I think there are ways to address this. I sincerely hope that changes are made in future games to address this. I really like Elden Ring. It's one of my favorite games ever. But, I feel like really good games should continue to inspire criticism. So, yeah, that's my point. Yeah, okay.